general enrollment could be thought of as much a supply control or at least production reducing program as it was an environmental program. It idled the most acres, as high as 37 million acres in time, but now shrinking dramatically. That general component is really less than a third of today's CRP program at about 8 million acres.
CRP has been a part of the farm policy landscape for decades, but how many acres are enrolled and what the program looks like has changed quite a bit over time. Looking ahead, its future may depend largely on what happens with the next Farm Bill. That's ahead on Nebraska Farmcast. From the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, this is Nebraska Farmcast. I'm Ryan Evans with the Center for Ag Profitability, and I invite you to check out the Center's farm and ranch management resources on our website at cap.unl.edu. The Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, pays landowners to take environmentally sensitive land out of production and establish vegetation to help protect soil, water, and wildlife habitat. But enrollment in the program has shifted over its 40 years, and today, CRP looks different than it did when it first started. In his new Nebraska Farmer Policy Report column, Nebraska Extension Agricultural Policy Specialist Brad Lubben looks at those trends and explains why Farm Bill reauthorization will play a key role in shaping the program going forward. Brad joins me now to talk about how CRP has evolved, what's driving enrollment decisions, and what producers and landowners should be watching as Farm Bill discussions continue. Brad, thanks for joining me again.
Good to be with you, Ryan.
So what was the CRP program originally created in the 1980s to address, and how has its role changed since then, maybe as far as sign up and the program itself?
Well, interesting. If we go back to 1985, the Farm Bill of 85 that created CRP, it was really a confluence of at least two major interests that pushed it across the finish line. The CRP certainly has valuable conservation benefits, erosion reduction and control that reduces soil erosion. It improves air quality, improves water quality. It protects environmental resources. It provides wildlife habitat. So it has a number of different conservation and environmental benefits that society values at large. So conservation groups particularly really saw value in a program like the CRP. But recall it was also implemented in the mid-1980s when we were dealing with low farm incomes and concerns about low prices driven by excess supplies. Well, pulling land out of production was a key policy priority too. And so a conservation reserve program that might pull millions of acres out of production, it specifically required highly erodible cropland as the eligibility or criterion to be admitted. And so it pulled cropland out of production at a time when we were trying to manage excess production. So it was a combination of economic and environmental interests that really got us the Farm Bill to start with.
What have been the biggest drivers behind the fluctuations in CRP enrollment over those past couple of decades? Because you point out in the column, it has gone up and down quite a bit.
It has gone up and down quite a bit, and it's worth thinking about the different types of CRP enrollments that we now see as well. Because the general enrollment that was first implemented with the program in 86, I believe, for the first enrollments, the general enrollment was a competitive process. Producers bid their land into the CRP, and lands were accepted based on some priority calculation and score for each parcel that was bid in. That general enrollment could be thought of as much a supply control or at least production reducing program as it was an environmental program, but it idled the most acres, as high as 37 million acres in time, but now shrinking dramatically. That general component is really less than a third of today's CRP program at about 8 million acres. The continuous CRP was implemented in the 1996 Farm Bill and in the following years. The continuous CRP tried to target enrollments more specifically to environmentally sensitive acres. Those acres like filter strips and buffer strips along streams. It didn't take a large whole field out of production. It took an isolated piece that had maybe outsized environmental benefits relative to the amount of land it retired. That continuous CRP helped protect streams and wellheads and maybe critical habitat. That CRP grew over the last 20 years, but it's really sort of leveled off recently at around 8 million acres total, currently enrolled in the CRP. Now, the grassland CRP is the newest kid on the block. It dates back to the 2014 Farm Bill. But over the last decade, the grassland CRP has grown dramatically. And the grassland CRP really does differ from the other two components of CRP. It doesn't take land out of production specifically for a conservation and environmental benefit. It keeps land in production, in this case grassland, that is going to stay in production for typically for grazing. It keeps land in production, but it manages it jointly for both production and environmental benefits. So you might make some adjustments to stocking rates, or you might make some adjustments to the grazing season to help manage the nesting season for birds and so forth. So it's a little more environmentally targeted, or it's a little more managerially targeted, but it keeps land in production. It's more of a working lands than a land retirement program. Well, that portion of the CRP is now grown, and it's actually, as of the latest statistics, it's over 10 million acres. So it's more than a third of the CRP itself over the last decade. That kind of reflects the economics and the motivations of enrolling in the CRP.
Yeah, and what are those motivations
Yeah.
on the landowner, on the end of the landowners and producers who are enrolling in the program? What are driving them to enroll?
Yeah. Well, if we think about the general enrollment and the continuous enrollment, it's effectively a rental rate. There's an annual payment for land enrolled in the CRP, and at least originally in the general enrollment, that was, as I mentioned, a competitively bid process. But you were comparing a potential rental rate for putting land into CRP and having to manage it to maintain cover and so forth. But you were comparing that to the potential returns from cropping that land. And so the economics of crop returns versus this potential guaranteed 10-year payment from USDA for enrolling land in the CRP was an economic decision. And enrollments went up maybe when commodity prices were lower. When commodity prices rebounded, enrollments came back down. Interestingly enough, in the early 2000s, we were concerned about how many acres might be coming out of the CRP at expiration in one big fell swoop. So concerned about it that USDA trotted out a program called the Re-Enrollment and Extension Offer Program, or REX, if anybody remembers acronyms. But REX was offered in about 2005 to try and slow down the number of acres that were going to quickly expire from the CRP. Arguably, no sooner did those contracts get signed to re-enroll or extend some acres, then commodity prices took off with the biofuels boom and some good fundamental market opportunities. And people started asking questions about how quickly one could take land out of the CRP. So ideas about potential early exits and so forth. So the interest in the CRP, at least in the general enrollment, has arguably been driven by commodity prices and comparing returns of cropping versus returns of putting something into the CRP. The continuous enrollment is more of a calculation of is this particular parcel, this subfield parcel, is it better off in cropping over the long run, or is it better off in a conserving use? Because the marginal economics there tend to be pretty attractive. Producers could put it in without competing, which meant they could put it in at the maximum acceptable rental rate for that particular class of land. It really did attract very specific targeted environmental opportunities. Now, the grassland CRP doesn't offer a full rental rate to producers. It's more of an incentive or stewardship rate to manage the parcel and to maintain good practices. But it certainly offers a great opportunity to grazing land, pasture and grazing landowners that want to more effectively manage their operation for both environmental and production purposes.
Yeah. Do you have an idea of what the numbers have been in Nebraska, how those compare to enrollment trends nationally?
Yeah, I think Nebraska, like much of the country, enrolled substantial acres early on. There were even concerns at some point about how many acres in a county could be idled I believe 25% was the maximum limit. And we had concerns in the 90s about how many acres got idled in certain areas to the point that it affected total economic activity in those counties. But more recently, enrollment has ebbed and flowed as well, and Nebraska sits at around 2.5 million acres enrolled today, or at least as of last fall, the latest statistics I've seen. But notably, 1.9 million of that 2.5 is the grasslands provision. So the program has really shifted here from taking land out of production to more effectively managing land that remains in production.
Maybe more of a land management question here, but what are the concerns, or is it what's in the process of taking land in and out of CRP for a landowner or producer?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about land that goes into the CRP and the general or continuous enrollment, those are long-term contracts, typically 10 or maybe up to 15 years. And some of that land, as it eventually expires from the CRP, the question is what happens to it from that point. In some cases, it's bid for re-enrollment in the continuous provisions, or maybe re-enrolled in continuous CRP for some new practices or new activities. In some cases, it does come back to production. There is even in something called the Transition Incentives Program, which tries to match up landowners with retiring CRP contracts with beginning farmers, such that the landowner can receive some incentives to bring that, if that land's coming back into production, to bring it back to a beginning farmer rancher, qualifies them for some additional incentives.
Thanks. And your policy report column in Nebraska Farmer this month, it points out that CRP enrollment certainly depends heavily on Farm Bill reauthorization. So can you walk through why the Farm Bill is so important then when it comes to the size and direction of the CRP program?
Well, the Farm Bill establishes the authority for the program in the first place and sets the enrollment cap. Those are two pieces that are authorized in the underlying Farm Bill legislation. So the CRP program authority lives from Farm Bill to Farm Bill. The cap itself has been set most recently in the 2018 Farm Bill. The cap was gradually increased to 27 million acres, and it sits there yet today. The Farm Bill is dependent upon, the CRP program is dependent upon a Farm Bill for authority going forward. We can serve existing contracts, but we can't enroll any new contracts absent Farm Bill authority. So when the 2018 Farm Bill expired in 2023, we effectively had a lapse in new CRP activity until they extended it for a year. Then it expired again in 24, and we had another lapse until they extended again into 25. Then, while many of the provisions of the Farm Bill were addressed in the Budget Reconciliation Bill in 25, including much of the rest of the conservation title, the CRP was not addressed. And so it expired again in late 2025, and it was another one-year extension that continued that authority going forward. That's the authority that finally gave FSA the opportunity to open up CRP enrollment programs here most recently. So it relies on that Farm Bill authority. It wasn't included in the Budget Reconciliation Bill last July because absent a change to the program enrollment cap, there wasn't a budget effect of reauthorizing the CRP. And since there wasn't a budget effect, it didn't fit in the Budget Reconciliation Bill. It would not have been germane to the bill. That only affects things that changed budget spending levels. So it couldn't be included at the time, which meant that it's still living off of underlying Farm Bill authority, and that's the authority that we again face this year of trying to get the rest of the Farm Bill, or what's been called the skinny Farm Bill, to the finish line by September.
You're mentioning enrollment caps. Are there other ways that policymakers work to balance these competing priorities you've been talking about between conservation goals and keeping enough land in production?
Well, there are more provisions in the CRP than I've described, and some of those are related to more targeted conservation practices, maybe water quality or wetlands restoration or critical habitat, various provisions that add some additional incentives to enrollments in the CRP. But the longer run direction of CRP has been, dependent upon Farm Bill reauthorization and dependent upon this sort of balance of both farm economic support that comes from enrollments in the CRP as well as the conservation and environmental benefits that come from that enrollment. It's been that coalition that has continued to support the CRP over time, and that's the question of going forward.
We talk every month here pretty much as you release and publish new policy report columns in Nebraska Farmer. And every time we talk about the work continuing on the next farm bill, it seems like. So as that work continues in Congress, what are some key questions surrounding CRP, particularly that would be relevant for producers and landowners to watch?
Yeah, we know that the House Ag Committee did work on a farm bill here earlier in March and did move a farm bill out of committee. It remains to be seen when and if it goes further, as well as whether the Senate can do something similar and eventually get to a final farm bill. But for the CRP program, most of the question is about a continuation and ensuring that there's authority going forward for continuing to accept new enrollments and run through new signups. There are questions about the enrollment cap. And I noted early in the CRP's history, it grew to as much as 37 million acres. There was, in its original legislation, it had a sort of a cap defined as 40 to 45 million. Eventually that was set and reduced over time. The 2008 Farm Bill and the 2014 Farm Bill both reduced the enrollment cap. Important caveat here, it didn't specifically reduce the cap to drive the CRP to lower levels, but the CRP enrollment was falling, again, sort of in line with improved crop economics meant reduced interest in enrolling in the CRP. And the CRP enrollment was falling. Well, if the CRP enrollment's falling, that is less dollars spent than what was originally budgeted, and reducing the cap allowed one to capture the budget savings accordingly. If the cap would have remained the same, then there technically wouldn't have been budget savings, even though we were spending less. The 8 Farm Bill and the 14 Farm Bill effectively captured that budget savings. Then it was the 18 Farm Bill that actually reversed course and started to increase the overall cap in the CRP. And that's where we remain today, with some interest to try and increase it further, some interest to potentially adjust some payment rates, but mostly about keeping the CRP largely as it exists.
That's Dr. Brad Lubben, Extension Ag Policy Specialist here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and you can find his latest Nebraska Farmer Policy Report column linked to in the notes to this podcast and on our center's website at cap.unl.edu. Brad, I really appreciate your time again.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you very much for listening to Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans, and you can find a host of farm and ranch management resources, including articles, decision tools, videos, and more on the Center for Agricultural Profitability's website, cap.unl.edu.